The Yukon is one of the last underexplored regions of Canada. It's nearly the size of Spain or California, yet it's home to fewer people than a small European town. It is vast, it's remote, and it's geologically rich. But can it be a gold mine, or will it be just another money pit? You might have heard of the Yukon because of the Klondike Gold Rush, the legendary frenzy of 1896 that pulled over 100,000 prospectors north, hoping to strike gold in Bonanza Creek. But over a century later, modern miners face a very different reality, and it's one where geology is only part of the equation. Beneath Yukon's frozen ground lie some of the best mineral belts in North America. Thinking about the Tantina Gold Belt, home to some of the richest gold deposits on the continent. There's the Selwyn Basin, one of the world's largest undeveloped zinc lead districts. And beyond that, there's potential for copper and tungsten, and even rare earth elements, I've been told. And the Yukon government offers some of the best exploration incentives in Canada. There's tax breaks, geological surveys, and financial credits. But exploration development here is anything but easy. The land is rich, but the obstacles can sometimes be even richer. There's First Nation agreements that have to be closed. There's a harsh climate that has to be dealt with, tough logistics, challenging infrastructure, water, energy, and wildlife concerns, and so on and so forth. So it only made sense to me as a speculator to look beyond the slick PowerPoint presentation and ask if the prospective geology really is worth the risk and the effort. Luckily for everyone watching, I'm not going to be the one answering all of those questions. Instead, I've got 7 companies here with me today, and hopefully they'll help me figure out what's working and what's failing in the Yukon, how they deal with some of its common challenges, and what the future might have in store for the region. Before we get into it, though, please understand that we're discussing risky venture capital businesses. So this video is intended only for experienced mining speculators, and you have to read and understand the warnings that are on your screen right now before continuing on. In addition, you should also understand that I am conflicted, as Resource Talks has received monetary compensation by the Yukon Mining Alliance for the production of this video, and you can read more about them on investyukon.ca. That all said, everyone should be asking themselves, and this is maybe true for life as well as the Yukon, but it's the why. And again, the Yukon's no different. There are many easier places to explore globally and even domestically within Canada. So why even bother with the Yukon in the first place?
First of all, the people. People are great in Yukon. I spent a lot of time there through the 90s and love the people in the Yukon territory. But basically the geology is excellent. They're in this, especially in the Tombstone Gold Belt. The targets there are usually very large, close to surface, simple metallurgy. And the belt has produced some, through from Alaska through all the way through the Yukon, some very attractive deposits and multi-million ounce deposits. So that's what got me back to return to the Yukon to explore in this Tombstone Gold Belt.
I thought it might have been the weather, and we'll talk about the weather in a second here too.
By the weather. Yeah, it is a limited, obviously the seasons are quite limited there until you get a really good camp established. So it's expensive exploration, but the targets are very significant, very large. So that's worth the risk reward.
I think that the Yukon, it's got a very proud mining history to it. And, we've got an exploration fairway of about 1,000 square kilometers, multiple discovered deposits. We've got a mine that was previously studied as a full feasibility study that we're going to update. It's been through an environmental assessment process with decisions from both the Yukon and the federal government. So the Yukon feels like a very open place to do business. I was extremely pleased when I started with the company a few weeks ago. Literally the day before I started, I was able to have a meeting with, I think there were over 50 participants, included essentially the cabinet of both the Yukon territories and the Northwest territories. And you just don't get that elsewhere in the world. I've worked on projects pretty much all over the world. And so many times when you have a project, your local stakeholders don't know what it is. They don't know the commodity. They don't know what mining is. And that is certainly not the case in the Yukon.
To answer that, Antonio, I got to give you 2 answers. The first is that The geology of Yukon is highly prospective. A number of other jurisdictions could make a similar claim, but Yukon is also underexplored compared to many of those jurisdictions. And the reason is that in the 1990s and early 2000s, the government of Yukon and Canada were going through the process of land claim settlements with the First Nations, and very little activity took place for about 15 years. And so we basically lost almost a generation of modern exploration. Since about 2005, things have picked up. People have started applying modern soil geochemistry, modern geophysics, cheaper drill technology, better trenching technology, all the things that make exploration more effective. And because of that, a lot of really, really interesting discoveries have been made, and known occurrences have been reactivated and really come to life again. So that's the short answer for why the Yukon. For our company, that's where our database is and my knowledge base. I've worked there my whole career, so it makes a lot of sense to focus on a good jurisdiction that you know a lot about.
Well, in one way, I disagree with you. I've worked around the world, and one of the best and easiest places to work for our particular project, but in general, is the Yukon. There are challenges in any jurisdiction to go to, whether it's Mexico or Africa. Australia is a very nice place. Again, it has its own challenges. Within Canada, the Yukon has so much potential that is virtually unknown. And that is the real attraction. You can go in, pick a rock, and find something of substance, something of size. And if you have the infrastructure is there, is always like it's considered to be the north, but there is infrastructure there. And if you look at it from an investment point of view, kind of what your question asked, analysts follow. There are a lot of analysts covering northern BC projects. There's even more covering Alaska. And these are world-class projects covered by world-class brokerages and funds. And in the Yukon, there are very few. And so that tells me, the Yukon, just from a general sense, investor-wise, the Yukon is prospective and unknown and has lots of potential. So from an exploration point of view, I have $1 that I have to spend somewhere, and I don't want to spend that money in a crowded place because it doesn't go very far. But I can spend that in the Yukon and turn that into $100 or $1,000 by being successful with exploration. And that's what I'm trying to do.
I think, most of my career has been in the Yukon. I started up there in 1994. And I think, the why the Yukon, and I think you've probably heard a lot of this, is that the mineral potential there is incredible. And what we're doing up there is a testament to that. And a lot of the other companies in the Yukon are finding new things in areas that have never been looked at before. So really, for me, it always comes down to the mineral potential. And it's just, why now is, I think, another thing that we're seeing is with all of the global issues that are going on right now, the world is shrinking and there's fewer and fewer safer places to be looking for minerals. And I think Canada is finally, we've always been mineral rich, but Canada and governments are realizing this and looking to genuinely make it easier to find and develop mines in Canada. And I think Yukon feels the same way, and that's why we're there.
What's the prospectivity that's really taken me aback from I've been in this business for about 20 years and been at site visits in all across the Americas and worked a lot of places around the world. And I've never seen prospectivity like I've seen in the Yukon.
So what, it's specifically the geology that's attracted you to it, or are there other aspects as well?
Yeah, well, I think what we've found is quite a diverse types of geology, right? There's one area in specific at Birch where we believe we found an intact copper porphyry. There's at Star River, we're into a carbonate replacement there, very high bonanza grade gold and silver sampling. We'll look forward to advancing that.
And yeah, elsewhere, AZ looks to have porphyry potential as well. So.
Well, actually, I'm in the process of acquiring a target that's right beside one of the longest lived mines in Yukon. So Trifecta's flagship, Mount Hinton, is directly adjacent to the Keno Hill mines, and they've been mining high-grade veins there for over 100 years. So it's, I think, we're in a legendary mining district. So there's definitely spots in Yukon that are more sensitive than others. And so I think that's why, having a real good knowledge of, the on-the-ground situation in a jurisdiction is very important.
Now, I think the why is almost as important as the why now. And the why now for the Yukon specifically is very important right now. And that is because of what happened at Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine, which was supposed to be a shining example of how a modern, large-scale gold mine could succeed in the Yukon. Instead, it's become somewhat of a cautionary tale. From the start, the mine struggled. It had lower than expected gold recoveries, unforgiving conditions, sometimes freezing the leach pads, and escalating costs due to high diesel prices. And there was workforce retention issues, allegedly. But it wasn't until June of 2024 when the mine experienced a catastrophic heap leach pad failure, which led to significant environmental concerns, including contamination of the nearby water sources and stuff like that we still have to figure out. So this is all allegedly, I guess. But all of this prompted the Yukon government to place the company into receivership to manage cleanup efforts. So how is that going to influence exploration and development in the Yukon? And what are some of the lessons that we as an industry can learn from what happened? And what can we do better in the future?
Well, there's endless lessons. You have to do these things right. You need to have a multi-generational approach. And I think that's one of the things that puts us at Fireweed and other members of the Lundin Group in good standing. We are a multi-generational group. This company was founded by the great-grandfather, that's handed down to Lucas, and now Lucas's sons are running the businesses. And we want to do things right. We aren't there to just get in and get out and flip it. They've been, just for example, I just came off the Filo mining project that resulted in a $4 billion plus takeover, bringing in BHP. And they've been there for decades. The Lundins want to do it right. They won't rush something. They will be there if they're wanted to be there. And they will focus on the people, the sustainability, and at the end of the day, the resources are the rights holders and the governments, and you need to be welcome there. So I suspect that while, yes, there are unfortunate headlines and unfortunate results that occurred because of that event at Victoria Gold, I also suspect there's a lot of people that had good, well-paying jobs that want to get back to work. They've been trained, they know what they're doing, and hopefully we can learn from these events and not have these sorts of events in the future.
I'd like to say that the government should also learn from it. I think everybody should learn from it. And that's partly just when something happens, calm down, don't panic, wait for the science to come in before a lot of inflammatory and patently incorrect statements are made. There was a lot of concern about leakage into the Yukon River system, even concerned by some people that the population of Mayo might be poisoned by cyanide. It turned out that the leakage into the water was from the original event was very minor. Also, the pad had slumped, but it looked like it could happen again. But in fact, geotechnical work showed that the pad was stable. So there was this massive overreaction, which made a really bad event. Let's face it, it was devastating for the shareholders. It was devastating for the Yukon economy, but environmentally, it didn't have nearly the impact that it was being portrayed initially. So as an industry and as a society, I think we've got to learn to, be a little bit more patient, don't jump to conclusions, try and focus on getting good science in so you can make really sound decisions going forward.
I think that is definitely true. I think that it could get a little bit harder. I think it will get a bit harder. I think that really got the attention of Yukoners and the government as well. I think the government, as do companies, have are required to make sure things are done right. And I think I know that companies and the government want to do it right. I think they're going to go redo some legislation. And I think, we're going to see a lot more regulatory work put into these projects. So, yeah, I think there might be a bit of reset and make sure things get done right, relook at the way things are done now to ensure that things like this don't happen again, but also looking to make it easier to move things forward in the Yukon as well. And we're going to need to go through that pain to get past that into where Yukoners are comfortable with more comfortable with the mining going on in the Yukon.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the time, it was, obviously it was a bit of a headwind initially. I think we're probably talking, it was in June of last year, if I'm not mistaken. I would say when I was giving presentations at various brokerages and sales desk presentations in July and August, I felt like there was then a bit of skittishness and concern in the space. And I mean, a lot of these things, it's based on rumor or right, sometimes more than fact. But what I will say is by the time we went to Beaver Creek in September, I found that concern had really given way to bullishness again for the Yukon. And so at Beaver Creek, we had probably a third of our meetings were corp dev meetings from companies in various different jurisdictions looking to get exposure to the Yukon. Right now, perhaps prices being beaten up for certain companies might have played a little part in that. But certainly there was bullishness in getting access and exposure to the territory. I think some of the biggest names in the space, whether it be B2 Gold with Snowline, have showed interest in the space. Now we see the Lundin family being incredibly bullish on the Yukon as well. So look, I'm fascinated with the Yukon because we were fortunate enough to acquire a portfolio of assets from the Berdahl family that have 30 years of prospecting behind them. I think incredibly high quality. But yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned now, there's no better place in the world to work than the Yukon right now.
The Yukon's geological potential is no secret, but what good is a discovery if it's far away from electricity and roads and water and other infrastructure? And is that often the case for Yukon projects?
No, certainly it is a liability. There is a lot of roads that could be upgraded, haven't been, such as the North Canal Road and other areas. I mean, that road has been used by mineral exploration companies for many, many years, and yet it's still, it's a 6 or 7 hour drive from Watson Lake or from Ross River into the Northwest Territories border, whether you're on the North Canal Road or the other roads that head in that direction from further south from Watson Lake. They need upgrading, and there's promises year after year, but it doesn't happen. The investment doesn't get there.
What's holding it back? Why is the investment not there?
I guess in some areas it may be that there is certainly some anti-mining groups in the Yukon that don't want to see the areas developed for mining, both on the side of the indigenous populations and the population in Whitehorse. So I think that plays some role. The government of the Yukon does keep talking about being pro-mining and want to see that development, but the biggest part of the holdup is the infrastructure. And powers, to be honest, I don't know a lot about the power restrictions in the Yukon and how they could improve that greatly, but it's something that is to be considered as well, of course.
It's extremely important for development, somewhat less so for exploration. But Yukon actually has better access than big parts of Alaska and BC, and much, much better than Northwest Territories. There is a fairly extensive road system through especially the southern part of the central part of Yukon. Power, that is an issue. I know that it's high on the government's agenda. They'd like to address it, but I think it's a chicken and egg situation. There are solutions, but the problem is they require a major development. And until a major development is basically green-lighted and moving forward, the Yukon government and the Yukon people just can't afford to develop, thousands or tens of thousands of megawatts of power on the anticipation that the development will occur. So I think that if we have a major development nearing or getting ready to go to demand that power, the solution will be there. They can extend the lineup from BC. Some people have talked about small scale nuclear. I know that they're pushing the idea of run a river again. Is perhaps more palatable than a big hydro dam. There's Yukon Energy has done a lot of studies about different ways that you could increase the available power on the grid. There's also suggestions that they could use excess power during the summer to pump water up into reservoirs, which would help to feed the dams and the low flow rates in the winter. They're even looking at biomass. So there's any number of ways of tackling the problem. But again, they need a major project to stimulate that power development.
Well, I mean, Whitehorse is a short 2-hour flight from Vancouver, so that's pretty easy. You can also fly right to Dawson as well, which is one of the more northern towns in Yukon. It's an easy drive on well-maintained roads to get up to Mayo, which is the nearest center to our project. And so, yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of roads have been built in Yukon, and they've almost all been built for resources. So I think there's a history of building infrastructure when the large projects are ready to move forward. And so I think you'll see that continue into the future. And that's been demonstrated recently with the government of Canada as well as the U.S. Department of Defense putting up money to upgrade the Northern Camel Highway, which that's a road that nearly accesses our Rye project, which is sort of on the eastern end of the Tombstone Gold Belt. So, I mean, there's commitments from all levels of government to continually improve infrastructure.
The Yukon is not your typical beach vacation spot. I think we all know that. The temperatures can get as low as -50 in the winter. That's -50 Celsius. And some places, especially in the north part of the region, they don't even get sunlight during some of those days, which of course limits the exploration season. So is that a deal breaker, or can companies do something about it? And how should a proper exploration development company deal with all that?
Obviously, you want to be ready to go as soon as the conditions warrant. And that comes back in part to your comment about infrastructure. If you've got a road and you're somewhere near a lake or a large body of water, you can drill, pretty much the same as you can in Ontario or Quebec or any of the other jurisdictions. The real problem comes in with the other types of field work, soil sampling and mapping and whatnot, because we obviously have got snow on the ground. It's a little bit hard to do that kind of work. So the idea is every year you get out, you hit it really hard. We operate more than 12 hours a day in many cases, and 7 days a week throughout the entire exploration season. Fortunately, with climate change, Yukon is definitely feeling the impact. Over the length of my career, which has spanned about 50 years, it used to be that by mid-September you were looking to shut down, and your field operations or your normal surface exploration activities. Now you can continue through most years till middle of October. So that's a fairly substantial expansion of the work season.
Well, what you really need to do is look at it more in terms of how many man hours you've got, say, on a drill program. And when we go up in the Yukon in the summer, we'll run crews 24 hours a day. Whereas when we're down in Nevada, you've got just a day shift, and then they'll go back to town, sleep at night, and then come back out. So you can get a year worth of drilling done in 6 months if you're running around the clock. And that's the beauty of the sun never going down in the summertime. I mean, working up there, I've spent a lot of years working in the field, and I mean, doing 12 to 15-hour days isn't as difficult. You're so energized by that midnight sun. So it's really a fun place to work in the summer. And then, like I said, yeah, you get more done because you've got the longer days, and you can just run 24 hours a day with 2 drill crews.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So I actually think, again, I like to think of it positively. So Dawson in particular has a 100-degree Celsius temperature swing every 6 months. Think about that. And it's absolutely beautiful. All the tourists come up in summer. It's plus 35 Celsius. It's wonderful, sunny all the time. And it gets to minus 65 or minus 70 in the winter. In the winter, it's full dark and it's absolutely glorious. You should come there then because there's no moisture in the air. You look up, there's no clouds at all. And it's just full sky, northern lights. It's great. Also no wind, mostly. And the wind is what really, at that temperature, is really problematic. But you can operate there. We don't as an exploration company, but I know others that do. And there's adaptations that you can make, adaptations you can make that let you do it. So, and well, the coffee deposit back in the day, drilling in the winter, how do we do that on a production basis? And they had an engineered, installed, basically a great big water bladder that they heated. And they had water and roads and they could operate no problem. So there are ways to do it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think plays into why there's so much prospectivity left in the Yukon, right? Because there's easier places, certainly historically, to work than the Yukon, right? Less remote. Perhaps you've got 4 seasons in which to drill and to explore and develop. What I will say is, as a company, Yukon Metals, what we've done is really focused in on 2 assets with very good accessibility. So one is on an all-Star River where we found bonanza grade gold and silver, is on an all-weather access road plowed by the government year-round. So there is the potential there, as we take it down the line, that you could work well into winter, be able to expedite goods there, be able to have really Timmins type drill rigs there on a skid with a shed over it. In the Yukon environment too. Now, sure, there's going to be some assets that are going to be helicopter supported and a smaller season, but at Star River, once we get in there in May, we think we can work well into the winter. At AZ, that's another asset that we have close to the Alaska border. We're 6 kilometers away from the Alaska Highway, so 3.5% copper outcropping 6 kilometers from the Alaska Highway. So not that remote, really, right? And I think there's an element where you've got a shorter season, but then you've got the geological potential that we talked about. And I think certainly there's the potential even in more remote areas to work from whether it be May until October or June through September.
Now, even if you found a deposit that is worthwhile, which is not an easy feat to begin with, and even if it is close to a road and then there's energy infrastructure, the water is not an issue, the weather is manageable, you will still need the approval to get it going. So this is where we're going to talk about the permitting and regulatory process in the Yukon, because without it, there really is nothing else.
I don't really compare and contrast it against other jurisdictions. You know, we in the Lundin world, we look for large resources. And that's what drew us to the Yukon. We've got a district play potential with Mac Pass. We've got the bonus of a discovered, tungsten deposit, which is very topical in today's geopolitical environment. And the Yukon has a long tradition of mining, as does the Northwest Territories. And as I said previously, the door appears to be wide open. Are we going to have to do things properly? Yes. Are we going to have to take care of the environment? Are we going to have to be as sustainable as possible, factoring in the rights holders in the area? Absolutely. But we wouldn't be there if we didn't think it could be done. We have freedom to allocate our capital anywhere in the world. And it's really just district level potential that we're focused on. And we see that for Fireweed at Mac Pass and Mac Tongue.
Well, I've spent the majority of my career working in Yukon, so I don't have a lot of experience permitting projects in other jurisdictions other than Nevada. In order to get drill permits, there's a pretty standard, set of requirements you've got to walk through. And as long as you do that, and you've got the local support, then we haven't had problems getting drill permits. All of our most advanced projects, we've been able to work through that process and get multi-year permits. And one of the nice thing about permits in Yukon is, say, when you're permitting for a drill program, you can permit for basically the whole project, so you don't have to predetermine where you're going to put those holes. Whereas, say, in Nevada, I've got to tell the BLM exactly where all my holes are going to go. So then when you drill one and say your exploration plan changes, you're able to do that on the fly in Yukon, because you can sort of permit, say, I'm going to drill within this broader area, and you don't have to specify exactly where. Whereas in other jurisdictions, if your geologic model changes in the middle of a program, you got to put your tools down and go re-permit. So we don't have to deal with those sort of issues in Yukon, which is pretty nice.
Well, it always takes longer than anyone wants it, I can tell you that, whatever jurisdiction you're in. But it has been particularly challenging in the Yukon lately. I will admit that. I think the Yukon government has a real capacity issue with the amount of explorers and people trying to do work in the Yukon. I don't think they necessarily have the capacity, and they're also working through the regulations and redoing some of the regulations as well. So it can create a bit of a challenge in timing. Ultimately, you can get them done. It's just going to take you a little bit longer than what you were hoping for. They have a really nice Class 1 notification that's a bit shorter of a timeline that we work under quite a bit. It's actually kind of limits the things you can do more to like having to be able to put in a camp or things like that. But if you don't need a camp or anything, you can actually do quite a lot under these Class 1 notifications is what they're called. But then if you want to go into bigger Class 3 or 4 permitting for exploration, we're not a miner, but for exploration, that's going to take you 6+ months to go through. So yeah, you need to plan ahead. That's for sure.
Nothing in mining ever happens without the approval of the local communities. If the local communities don't want you to be there, you're not going to be there. And especially in the Yukon, with what happened with Victoria Gold last year, not all First Nations in the region can appreciate mining and exploration development. So how much of a challenge is that right now? And what can the companies do to deal with it?
Moving exploration projects ahead at this time, I think they're waiting for some outcomes to come about. I think that when that's in place, they'll be incentivized to really explore again. And when I say that, I know that a lot of the First Nations are trying to implement policies and practices that are very similar to some of those that are taking place in BC. And that involves a lot more early stage consultation. The Yukon government's in the process of reviewing the existing Mining Act, and I think that'll be replaced with a new act fairly soon. And until that new act is in place, I think everybody is just trying to dampen things down. I liken the situation right now to some degree to what was there during the land claims negotiations. Everybody is kind of sitting back and saying, whoa, let's just see how this all works out before we rush ahead too aggressively. So it's a difficult, challenging time for Yukon explorers to get permitted on a timely basis. Fortunately, a lot of the big projects have got multi-year permits, and that's something we took advantage of. A number of our, what I would say, showcase projects have got multi-year exploration permits that allow very large numbers of drill holes without specific locations designated, and they're good for a number of years yet. So I think that when the new mining legislation comes in, I think that there will inevitably be a few years as the various parties try to figure out how best to work under it. But no one knows at this point what the new regulations will be, what form they'll take. I've heard some suggestions that they could be fairly revolutionary in the way they attack actual ownership of mineral rights. But I don't think that necessarily it'll be unworkable. I just think that there's going to have to be a lot of input from industry to help guide it so that we don't end up with a lot of unintended consequences. But that process is still open, and I'm optimistic that the governments will be smart enough to realize that they can't unilaterally come up with something that's going to be workable for the industry. So we'll just have to see.
I think the Yukon government has been progressive for sure in terms of engaging them. And in the last, there are now 13 Aboriginal land use agreements between the Yukon government. I might be 11 between the Yukon government and the individual First Nations. For us in Dawson, they've also gone through a series of, they're called regional land use planning areas. And the one that's most advanced is the one in Dawson that covers the gold fields. And so that's basically ready for full signing. It's been done. All the 5-year process is over. We know what the First Nations concerns are and where they're concerned from a landscape point of view and where they're not and have no concerns, in particular relative to Klondike gold. All the area of the Klondike gold fields has been mined for 120 odd years and disturbed. And really there's nothing left there that the First Nations are concerned about. So from our perspective, effectively land use planning is settled. And okay, let's go, which would be what you would think normally, because it's just been a historic site. It's been still mined to this day and never stopped mining from 1896 until now. Other places have cultural significance and again, they're beyond the borders of where I'm concerned about. But there is a planning process there, and there is a treaty process there too that the Yukon government has put in place and signed. So it's a good place.
So we have quite a few assets. We have 17 total assets. We have one asset in the FNNND territory. That asset's called Nut. And so working last year, as you might suspect, the NND requested that we hold off on permitting there in that jurisdiction, given all they were working through with Victoria Gold and Eagle. But they invited us to permit in November of last year, right? So even with the First Nation most impacted by that event, right? They invited us to join the process in November. So look, I think it's obviously not a monolith. There's many that we've got assets that are relatively spread out. And we have areas where we're building quite close relationships. We have a company that's working with us named Vision Quest that has done a lot of our work, that did our soil sampling, quite technical mechanized soil drill sampling at Birch. Built our camp at Star River, which was a meaningful camp off the ground on wooden bases, heated camp, really good camp. We've had them expediting camp management, cook. So Vision Quest have been very helpful. Also did line cutting for us, as well as staking. So I look forward to continuing that relationship and seeing what other relationships we can build as well that benefit us and the First Nations and in the lands that we're seeking to work.
How though? I mean, how do you actually build that relationship? Like, what's the most important thing you have to pay attention to when building a stronger relationship with the First Nations?
Well, like I said, I mean, look, this is my first time working in the Yukon, but certainly consultation, listening, making sure that you do that you where if possible that you have the opportunity to sit down and listen to what concerns there are, see which areas there are of shared priorities, and have those conversations before you even consider going about permitting, right? So that you make sure that you've included those their thoughts and concerns in what you advance.
Naturally, all of the companies you've been hearing from here today are going to be bullish, maybe even have a rosy view on the region as a whole. But why are some of the majors selling their assets here? And what's it going to take to get major mining companies to start investing as opposed to divesting from the Yukon?
I mean, my whole career, I've now been with the Lundins for about 20 years, and I operate on the junior end of the spectrum. And I think it's just a risk profile. The majors are happy to pay up for assets that are further along the de-risking schedule. They allow the exploration companies to go and take the frontier risk. But as you see a project developing, as you see the geopolitical environment shifting, you will see majors coming to jurisdictions like this.
It's a good question because, from my previous work with another company, we brought in Agnico, we brought in Barrick, Newmont's been there. So the companies are coming there and there is an interest, and it's how do we get them to stay? Where do we get a deposit that's critical mass for them to be able to put in that infrastructure and devote the time to the Yukon? So I don't really know if I have the answer to that, but I think once you have an asset that a larger company knows that they are, is a 10 or a 20-year-ish plus mine life, then they can commit to that. And I mean, Hecla's in there right now. They're mining. They're a very large company. And there's a lot of other majors that are interested and have investments in companies up there. So I think it's probably just going to take a robust project for a major to commit to. And I think that bode very well for the Yukon. And I think it'll happen.
When, though? Is that something that you expect to happen in 2025, or do you think you're going to have to wait a whole lot longer?
I don't know. It's hard to get into the minds of those majors, right? Like me, what's going on with Casino? What's going on with Snowline? These are robust projects, and where is that comfort level? It could be a permitting thing, for example, for Casino, but there's some great projects. And I mean, that's a good question for the majors. What is it that's going to make them come in? It's I think infrastructure and permitting would be a big piece to a lot of projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the structure of how these things are advanced. I mean, I think for many reasons, juniors are best suited to do some of the earlier stage work like we're doing, right? And to de-risk these projects for majors. I mean, obviously we have seen majors get involved in the Yukon before. We saw Goldcorp acquire exposure to the Yukon. We are seeing, I mean, the mid-tier like B2 Gold acquiring a position there. We've seen another, whether Hecla's a mid-tier or where they are, but obviously them taking a long time large operator like Hecla taking an interest in the Yukon. And then, I mean, Snowline, I mean, I think that's with Valley, I mean, I think that one is at some point going to be a target. And I mean, that they've been at it now for 3.5, 4 years, maybe only a few years now with Valley. But that with the kind of grade, continuity and size, I think is the type of asset that it can take a while, right, to develop and to de-risk. And I think there's maybe more de-risking they can do to benefit Snowline shareholders. But to me, that one is, as far as jurisdictional risk, I think is going to benefit most majors or mid-tiers portfolio, right? It's probably going to bring their jurisdictional risk down. It's probably going to increase their quality of ounces, right, relative to grade. And so I would think that would be an accretive opportunity for many companies, whether it be mid-tier or major. Look, I think I don't think the Yukon has ever been more busy than it is now, or the amount of companies or the amount of interest there is there. And I think companies like Snowline and I would say ourselves benefited from really a 30-year head start by the Berdahl family tying up some of the best properties in the territory 20 to 30 years ago.
As you're probably getting it by now, and I'm putting it mildly, the Yukon is not the easiest place to operate in, albeit exploration, development, or mining. But what does that mean specifically? What should I, as a junior mining speculator, be looking out for? What are some of the red flags? What are some of the best practices? What are some of the things to look out for when I'm picking companies that operate in the Yukon?
I think a lot of it does come down to, to the project. I mean, you've got to get adept at looking at news releases and understanding, what the news actually represents. I mean, is this just a random sample that doesn't have any other information backing it up, or is it, or does say a sample is it incredibly important based on the other information that's on a project? So yeah, it's tough. I mean, a lot of people ask the question, what's more important, management or project or whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, the projects that are the top tier projects are gonna move forward. And if you've got a responsible team that can demonstrate the potential of a project, at some point the market's gonna recognize that, and you're gonna be successful. So I think just the quality of deposits that you can still find in Yukon is really why we're there. I mean, there's so many of the projects that I'm familiar with that are pre-resource, have had incredible early stage discoveries made that haven't been followed up. And yeah, I mean, comparing those results to say other jurisdictions like in Nevada, where it's been picked over for for a lot longer. I think the potential for those real big, high grade type assets it's still really there in Yukon. So that's, I think, what makes it special.
Again, from my experience, and I invest in these all the time, I'm looking for the best potential bang for the least amount of money. And so where can I go to invest in something that can hit a home run times 10? And in the world these days, there are very, very few places that are left that can be picked over where you can discover that kind of deposit. China is one, but we don't have investment access to China. Russia is another. Africa, parts of that, because it's been war and torn and stuff, but you have to put up with risk from, having everything expropriated and whatever. And the Yukon, surprisingly enough, has been completely overlooked. Even from a regional sense, I constantly criticize the Yukon geology map, the official one, because some aspects of it are wrong. And it opens up vast tracts of land that are prospective. Sean Ryan, who's the prospector who discovered Underworld and then coffee, on the idea that, geez, maybe nobody's ever looked for gold, let's go look. And he found 2 deposits 20 years ago, 10 and 20 years ago. That potential still exists. So if I want to spend money with, put a dime to make $10, that's on the top of my list to go to Yukon. It's why I'm the CEO of a company now. I started this I inherited this or took Klondike Gold over 10 years ago. And after that, I'd spent 5 years working for a different company in the Yukon, and that experience impressed me because, having been around the world, oh man, you can find these things here by tripping over them. Think about it. The discovery cost is very low. Okay, this is a great place to go trip over stuff. Why not? So, and that's been borne out. You're talking to all these other companies in Yukon here that have potentially world-class projects. Well, I mean, there's a group of 10 or 12 or so of those that, okay, that's world-class. Where else are you going to go to get that? I don't know. I really don't know.
Apart from all of the other things that you do when you're looking at the company, I mean, if you're going to do it on a project basis, you want to be able to see the scale of whatever project that they're trying to advance or what they're looking to find. For us, for example, we have a property called the Catch Project. Well, it's right off the highway. It's near power, and it's a copper gold porphyry discovery. And it's situated in the Stikine terrane that comes up into the Yukon where nobody's looked before. Stikine hosts the Golden Triangle deposits, comes up into the Yukon. Nobody's ever looked at it in the Yukon in earnest, and we are. So we're looking for big projects that will attract big companies near a road and infrastructure. So these are the things, as an investor, you might want to look at. Or do you want to look at a company that's might have a good asset, but it's 100 kilometers away from road and power? Do you think that's going to be important for you as an investor? And what are your timelines as an investor as you look at these different projects that are located in different portions of the Yukon? So I think for us, we're looking for big scale projects that are close to infrastructure. That's where we're going.
at the end, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about some of the things that we might be getting wrong about the Yukon as speculators, because nothing is ever really just black or just white. So, what are some of the most common misconceptions about the Yukon when it comes down to exploring and development?
Well, yeah, I guess the remoteness is one of the things that it came up as a question. People are concerned about the remoteness of Yukon, but in reality, there's road system throughout the territory. They've got like I said, it's a you can either drive up from BC, you can do a short flight from Vancouver, and not only that, but you've got both government and First Nations that are supportive of the mining sector. So I think it's a great place to work. The misconceptions, I guess, would be because there's not a lot of operating mines right now, maybe that it's a tough place to get those things going. But we have seen a few mines permitted over the last number of years, and I anticipate there'll be more coming through based on the projects we see in the pipeline. So I guess it's more of a show me story for Yukon right now. Is get some of these more advanced projects permitted and going, and that'd be a win for all of us.
Just with some of the recent events, and I think Yukon as a whole is depending on who your investors are. If they're new investors to the industry and don't know the Yukon or the North, I think one of the big misconceptions is you can't really it's inefficient to work up in the North, but that's completely not true. Yukon is well set up with service providers to do exploration. I think another misconception is that that not all First Nations are on side with projects. Well, that's not true. For example, we're working in and around Little Sam Carmex First Nation in Selkirk. Well, Selkirk is just buying the Minto mine. So it's really dependent on where you work in the Yukon. And I think there's a misconception that, it's an some Yukoners aren't interested in the mining industry, which is untrue. It's a big piece of the Yukon's economy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the seasonality is one of them, right? I mean, I think that's we talked about that the rub there is that you have this vast amount of geological potential and endowment and prospectivity, but then you have this in some cases relatively tight season, whether it's May to October or June to September. But I think there's, look, with investors that are used to working in other areas, there can be concerns of perhaps a lack of activity in the space and a lack of news, a lack of a catalyst from one season to another. But I think what we found is even having half a season of work, not even benefiting from a whole season, is that there's on multiple assets, there's been, as we've grown more and more intimate with the assets, we've obviously told the financial community and the market what we're going to do, and then we've turned around and done it. We've worked to execute well, and then we've reminded the market that we've done what we said we were going to do, and that we've executed well, and then what we're going to do next. So, I mean, now we're getting towards the end of February. Right, we with our share price and our activity, I think we've continued to demonstrate our execution and look, we have a fabulous shareholder base, so that helps a lot as well. But we've been able to, I think, keep that momentum going. Right, and we're in spring almost here, right? We've got PDAC is just around the corner here, and in no time we'll be building camps, announcing drilling contracts, right? So look, I just think that there is, if the execution is there, the shareholder base is there, and the communication is there, I think for shareholders, there doesn't need to be necessarily that concern about seasonality and news flow when you have such geological endowment and the potential to put out so much good news, like so many companies, like Snowline, for instance, Fireweed have been able to do, and they've been able to demonstrate success over multiple years doing that.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find a company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."